You're listening to Star Wars Politics. What's up, everyone? This is the Star Wars Politics podcast. I'm G.
I'm B.
And this is our very first episode. How do you feel, B? We finally starting our very own podcast.
It is actually amazing. I can't wait to get started, and I'm glad people will understand our ideas and our decisions for Star Wars.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting for us to put our thoughts and feelings out there. You know, the past couple of years, we've just been talking to ourselves every day. We've thought, you know, what would it be like if we actually just recorded our thoughts and put them out there for the world? And I think we don't know everything about Star Wars. We don't know everything about politics. We don't know a lot about a lot. But I think that we do have some interesting takes. And at the very end of the day, we just want to build a community of people who are not even necessarily like-minded. We just want a community of Star Wars fans that we can engage with and just talk about nerdy stuff.
Yeah, at the end of the day, we just wanted to, at least for me personally, I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents into the Star Wars fandom, and here we are. We're starting this podcast, so
yeah, the very first episode of the Star Wars Politics podcast. You can find this both on YouTube and Spotify. We may push the podcast out to other podcast platforms as well, but we wanted to start off with just YouTube and Spotify. You can find us on YouTube at Star Wars Politics. We'll also put our direct link to our YouTube channel in the description. So yeah, let's get started with the very first episode. So with all the changes that are happening at Disney, it was, I believe, just not this last Sunday, but the Sunday before that.
Yeah, it was very recently.
Yeah, very recently when we're recording this, Bob Chapek left Disney. I believe he got fired.
Yeah, essentially fired.
Yeah, got fired by the board, and now they're bringing Bob Iger back as the CEO. Bob Iger released a statement on, I believe it was the same night, Sunday night, to the employees, and the employees thought it was a joke because it was so sudden and so basically random.
Random because if you guys don't understand business world, pretty much nothing gets done over the weekend except for maybe Friday, because that's just a Friday afternoon. No one really cares. But for them to do it on a Sunday night, that's very weird for especially a big company like Disney, just to have an announcement like that. So the employees thought they were getting hacked or something like that. They didn't think it was true, but certainly weird.
Certainly weird. And, you know, I think it raises a very good question as we start our own podcast here, you know, of if we're going to be covering Star Wars content primarily, you know, both B and I, you know, we're into Marvel and he's a little bit more into DC than I am. I believe that's a whole nother conversation. But, you know, we're going to focus primarily on Star Wars and maybe dabble in Marvel a little bit. So we thought it would be a really interesting topic for our first episode to kind of talk about the direction of Disney and where Disney is going to be going from here and what that means for Star Wars. So B, I'll pose the question that we can kind of get the ball rolling here. Is this a turning point for Disney with, you know, Bob Iger coming back as the CEO? And more importantly, is this a turning point for Star Wars? What's the future of Star Wars now that Bob Iger's back? And let's just kind of talk about where we've been the past 2 years with the content that we've gotten and just kind of get our audience caught up to speed maybe about how we feel about some of the recent projects and kind of where we feel like we're going from here. So I'll turn it over to you. Give your monologue here.
Um, I do think it is a turning point for Star Wars and for Disney. I think it's also it's another critical milestone or point in Disney and Star Wars particularly. Uh, Mainly because of the content that we've been getting the past couple of years. We have gotten Kenobi. We got what else came out? Andor just finished.
Andor just finished. Yeah, for our listeners, Andor just finished last week. At the time that we're recording this podcast right now. So Andor, Kenobi. Before that, we had Book of Boba Fett this
Book of
past
Boba Fett.
beginning last December, actually. So we're almost coming on the year anniversary of the first episode.
Which one would think that those two shows, at least Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi, Obi-Wan Kenobi, would be pretty great shows, but they were basically below average, in my opinion. There were some highlights, of course, in those shows, but overall it's been pretty below average, especially for those two titles of shows.
Mm-hmm.
Now with this, so that's kind of the history of what we're coming off of. Now, Bob Iger.
Well, yeah, and let's not forget about The Mandalorian, of course, too, because, for our listeners out there, I think that it's going to be they're going to pretty quickly realize that both you and I, we are not huge fans of the Book of Boba Fett. We're not huge fans of Kenobi. They weren't terrible shows, but they weren't what we were necessarily expecting those shows to be. And there are aspects of the Book of Boba Fett and Kenobi, those two shows, that I personally find enjoyable. I'll speak for myself on that, but I did find some aspects of those shows to be enjoyable, and I think a lot of fans did too. One may argue that there's a lot of diversity in the shows. Even Jan Favreau and Dave Filoni in an recent interview I know came out, and they both were talking about how there's a lot of variety in the types of genre of shows that these are on Disney Plus. So I think there's a point to be made that there's not some consistency. But do you think that is going to hurt the brand of Star Wars or help the brand of Star Wars kind of in the future?
Well, to take it kind of in that range, there's a difference between minor things and changing it up, like Mando,
Sure.
and that being really well done. But at the foundation of Mando is the heart of Star Wars, of this mystical element to it.
Sense of adventure. Mm-hmm.
Sense of adventure. Really enjoyable, really fun things that they did. Whereas Boba Fett and Obi-Wan Kenobi, there was absolutely those things, but it wasn't consistent through the whole show.
Yeah.
Or at least in season 1 of Mando particularly, the argument could be made that people like me and you, in our opinions, like, we just want to see Jedi and all that. That's not really the case, because Mando proved, especially in season 1, that that's not the case.
Right.
And I guess it just really depends on what the heart of Star Wars and who the creator is making it.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, this is George Lucas's property. It is Disney's now overall, but this is George Lucas's legacy and really property that they're trying to uplift and uphold to the guy who created it.
Right.
And with Bob Iger coming in, I just don't know how much of a change, or I guess coming back again, as the CEO, I don't know how much it's actually going to change the trajectory of Star Wars. I am normally, just for listeners out there, have a personality of being pessimistic on things and not really looking at things great. And in this case, I just don't, with the track record that Disney has with the sequels and how fans feel about that, with the amount of content that we've got, excluding Mando
and Tales of the Jedi,
I don't see where the change and the good change, because it's going to change content, I think. Just how good of content we're going to get as Star Wars fans. Of course, that's subjective to everyone, but in terms of the vast majority of people liking Star Wars and caring about Star Wars, I'm not sure that it's going to change unless something major happens other than within Lucasfilm.
Yeah. No, you raise a good question here of legacy. And, I was listening to some of the creators on YouTube that both you and I listen to, talking about how potentially one of the reasons why Bob Iger came back in the first place was because of legacy. He has built this legacy. He was there when Disney bought the Marvel IP. He was there when Disney, from George Lucas. Legacy at stake here. And I think it's fair to say, you and I are not, at least I'll speak for myself, I'm not completely savvy when it comes to all the business practices and stuff. So I can't speak on, the business side of things. I can say that it would appear from an outsider's perspective and just the overall general sentiment among, I guess you could say, Disney fans, that there has been over the past, since the pandemic, there has been a general decline in, I don't know if it would be the word trust or just overall general support or positive vibes, as a millennial might say, towards Disney. And so you talk about legacy, you talk about Bob Iger coming back to preserve his legacy, and then you talk about George Lucas's legacy, and it makes me, people talk about,
and it's also the legacy of Disney itself, Walt Disney,
right?
Because it's his legacy. But I've also heard reports, they're not just from basically from our content creators, is that there was a report out there that they heard, and I'm getting it from them, that there might be a chance, or there was a possible chance, that the reason Bob Iger came back was because there was a possibility that Apple could buy Disney.
Yeah.
And he just, like you said, he just wanted to protect his legacy of it.
Mm-hmm.
And since he left and then he's now coming back, it's like he doesn't want Apple to buy it. But Disney's not looking good from an outsider perspective overall.
Well, you have Disney Plus subscription prices increasing. You know about this, right?
Most definitely.
I think there's different packages, but they're raising prices on Disney Plus to begin with on December 8th. And I believe I think it's the standard package might be $10.99 now, but there's a lower tier package where you can get ads for a lower price. I'm not sure what the dollar amount per month on that is, but just right there, like Disney Plus was supposed to be this moneymaker for them, and my understanding is that it's not making the money. So maybe let's pose that question. Do you think it's not making money because of the type of content that they're pushing out, or do you think people just don't care about Disney Plus? Like, I know we're talking about this, trying to come at it from a Star Wars perspective here, but like, I don't understand what's going on at Disney.
I don't either. Well, there's a difference between Chapek and Iger. Bob Chapek and Bob Iger is Bob Iger's more of a people person, and Chapek was more of the business savvy person, and he just wanted to get into Disney, gut it out, and basically do his own thing. And whereas Bob Iger's like, no, you're going to have a strategic direction towards this. Here's how you're going to do this, and he just never did that. I don't understand what Disney is doing because, in my opinion, well, I'll just put it from a Star Wars perspective. We got that report a while. I can't remember when we got it from once again our content creators that we listen to, that there was a report that said uh, Disney is in a culture of fear and anxiety over making new Star Wars content and getting Star
Mm-hmm.
Wars done right.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that's kind of what Chapek was doing, although he really didn't care about the fear. He was just doing his own thing, not really listening to audience. But it's kind of that's kind of what Disney overall feels like is a culture of fear and anxiety because especially for Star Wars, they don't know how to make Star Wars content in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
They there's no plan, there's no identity towards Star Wars. There's just, oh well, we have to get it right. Get it right. I think
Right.
to get it right is to live up to the legacy of what George Lucas created and what George Lucas and continuing that story that he created, not differentiate, not making your own, not making the characters that we love and fans love change, but continuing that story from what fans know and love about those characters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
no, and that's that word legacy again that keeps getting brought up. Is I think what's we talk about what's at stake here. You know, is what is the trajectory of Disney, and you know, that word legacy. We've talked about the legacy of Walt Disney, which side tangent, but I've heard that this move of Bob Iger to come back is just to almost like a placeholder because there's some isn't there some theory out there that Walt Disney's head is like frozen or something like in the basement like the underground tunnels of Disney World or Disneyland or something. I don't know. There's like
I don't even know if that's true.
well, I know
I don't.
obviously I don't know. I don't think it's true, but I there is that conspiracy out there. There's something like that. Perhaps maybe a listener one day can help us with that conspiracy. But anyway, you talk about the legacy, and supposedly he's supposed to be defrosted his head, and he's going to come back and run Disney. That Bob Iger is supposed to be a placeholder until he gets back. Anyway, but we talk about legacy. We talk about Walt's legacy. We talk about Bob Iger's legacy, like coming back to preserve that legacy. We talk about George Lucas's legacy, and you know, coming and trying to really figure out how Star Wars can get better. And I think it's so I think that conversation we could talk forever about that is what makes good Star Wars content because we can't just ignore the fact that there are people out there that like the Star Wars content that we're getting.
Oh
And I
no,
think
and fair play to them. If they
I
enjoy it, go enjoy that. But I think most people are not down with this sort of content and the level of content that we're getting at. Like, just for example, I know me and we'll get into this later on a different podcast, but me and you don't like Andor. But one thing that I do have to take credit, or not, I don't take credit for. I don't take credit for anything. One thing that I do have to give people credit for and calling out is like, why didn't you give Kenobi the Andor treatment when it comes to filming and shooting and production on that show?
I have no idea. I for the life of me, I don't understand that. It's either perhaps it's two things. One, they thought that Kenobi itself, the name of Kenobi, would carry itself, and they wouldn't have to give it so much of a budget. Um,
But
that's one. Or they really just don't understand the the absolute money maker they're sitting on with Kenobi, and just didn't full attention that it needed. I don't know. I really don't.
It's just not understanding Star Wars. It's what at the end of the day, there's no plan, there's no anything. But
You think they truly don't understand that the value of Kenobi, just the name of Kenobi, they don't understand what that is and what that means to.
I think that they understand the name of Kenobi because a lot of people showed up for those live streams and
But I'm saying
reaction
Lucasfilm.
videos.
I'm saying the leadership at Lucasfilm, the decision makers. You're saying that the reason why it didn't get the Andor treatment is because they don't understand the value of Kenobi.
I think they understand the value of Kenobi. They just don't understand how to use that value correctly and where to put money and where to put its resources.
So it's a lead. I mean, at the end of the day, so at the same time, we're talking about Bob Iger coming back. There's also rumors out there that Kathleen Kennedy, the current president of Lucasfilm, in the near future. I believe one of the reports that came out was that Kathy's tenure could be ending. It could be ending before Indiana Jones 5 or shortly after Indy 5 comes out. You think? I mean, what you're saying is it's solely like it's a leadership issue, not only not understanding the value of the Star Wars brand and what it means, but truly not even knowing it in the business sense of where to allocate resources and how to actually get stuff done.
Yes, because
And see, that surprises me though, because even not your opinion on it, but if it were true, it would be so surprising to me because Kathleen Kennedy has done so much for filmmaking and Lucasfilm. Like it mind boggles me that she could be so much of the issue when not only was she handpicked by George Lucas to lead Lucasfilm, but she's done all these things for filmmaking in the past. It's like how could
and
she be responsible?
I
I mean,
think
I
it's
think
her.
she is, but
I think it's her track record of what she has shown to understand through Star Wars. Like
as a leader.
as a leader, she.
Mhm.
Let's just go down memory lane with Star Wars and the history of it. So George Lucas sells Disney in 2012, right?
20, yeah, I think he sold it in 2012. But I don't know if the acquisition actually took place till 2013.
Right, around that time period.
2012, 2013, sure.
George Lucas handpicks Kathleen Kennedy, and she has
Hmm.
done great. She has done great. I want to preference this by saying this first. She has done great job, a great thing for filmmaking and production, filmmaking history. She's one of the best to ever do it, and I think she does well in other forms. Now, to get to Star Wars, I'll keep continuing the story from the history perspective. She then decides, or Lucasfilm, but really they decide after the acquisition, Disney decides, okay, we're going to create a sequel trilogy for Star Wars. And everyone is excited for Star Wars. You have 7, 8, 9 go by. I'm just giving you a brief glimpse of what 7 was. 7 was, in my opinion, basically 4, but better graphics, better production, I guess, what you would say, than 4.
Better technology at the end of the day. I mean,
Better technology. 8 was just a train wreck of a movie for the fandom. And then 9 made it even worse because you erased everything that 8 did,
which some people like, some people didn't like.
which some people liked, some people didn't, but you basically erased that, so there's no continuity, right? And then years later, we're at this point now, and they finally have admitted to what I referenced earlier was that fear of culture and that fear of getting it right. They finally recognized that the sequels were a disaster because they did not plan. They did not have a plan going for those movies, and they basically just did it on the fly.
But let me stop you right there, though. You say that they realized it was a disaster. To my knowledge, they haven't publicly came out and said that they recognize that. It would
No,
seem that they have recognized that through some of their actions as of late. But to be clear, they have not publicly came out and said that the sequels were a quote unquote train wreck.
mm,
And that's our opinion. You know, so that's not to say that people can't like the sequels. They absolutely can like
no,
them.
no. They can absolutely like the sequels, and if we ever get viewers, and hopefully we get viewers, I would want someone who likes the sequels to explain to me and give me a better understanding of why the sequels are a good thing and how, like, basically change my mind over the sequels. Because I was still yet to find someone or listen or meet a Star Wars fan that has clearly outlined why the sequels are good.
Hmm.
And I'm really open to that because I'm still confused on everything. But it at the end of the day, they just did not have a clear direction for Star Wars and for the sequel trilogy. They didn't understand how the writing is done, and Star Wars has never been good writing. But at the end of the day, it's kind of the mythology, the good feeling, the good vibe about Star Wars that made it Star Wars. And
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be terrible writing, but they just didn't nail the writing. They had no direction of Star Wars, and they really didn't plan for it. Like, at the end of the day, they just did not have a plan, and that falls, at least in my opinion, on Kathy, because as it currently stands, there's a guy by the name of Dave Filoni. There are two guys. Dave Filoni and Jan Favreau seem to be like a dynamic duo for Disney, and I just don't know why they haven't done it already. I understand they're probably letting Kathy have a goodbye, a beautiful send off out into the twin sons type moment. But I just don't know why you wouldn't move on from Kathy now. Like, Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are sitting there waiting, and you would think that they would take the position, and they would be the rightful positions to take.
They'd be the rightful people for those positions, is what I think
Yeah.
what you're trying to say. But I don't, truthfully, and I'm not John Favreau or Dave Filoni, but I don't know if they want that job. Um, we pride ourselves. We're going to do our best to stay away from the toxicity that is in the Star Wars fandom. We don't want to be toxic fans. We want to share our opinions, but we don't want to be toxic fans. Um, that being said, there are toxic fans out there, and I don't know if someone like Dave Filoni and John Favreau, not that they're not equipped to handle the type of criticism they would get, but I don't know if they want to be in that position to receive that criticism. Do you think they like like John Favreau? Okay, maybe, but Dave Filoni, do you think he wants to be in that position to take the
No,
criticism?
no, no, no. And I I think everyone in Star Wars has identified, or at least a majority of Star Wars fans have identified them as like the rightful heirs to the throne of Lucasfilm.
Well, everybody likes him. I mean, from a
Everyone
likability
likes them.
standpoint,
For
it's a no-brainer.
for our listeners, Dave Filoni has helped George Lucas create the Clone Wars. He has done the show Star Wars Rebels. Just recently, Tales of the Jedi,
He was involved with Bad Batch,
Bad Batch,
Mandalorian, but listen, he was also involved with Book of Boba Fett.
Mandalorian, and Book of Boba Fett. But overall, he has hit more than he has and now coming up for the new Star Wars year is we're gonna have Bad Batch season 2,
For sure.
Mando season 3, and Ahsoka.
Well, Ahsoka's rumored. I don't know. Has Ahsoka officially came out with a date yet, or are we just assuming that Ahsoka's coming out?
I think we're assuming that Ahsoka's coming out, but
I think it's pretty a fair expectation that it will come out probably quarter four. Honestly, probably a year from now.
any rate, he's making that show.
Yeah.
And we would all expect those to be hits, at least Bad Batch maybe average, but more or less a hit.
Yeah.
At least nowadays, average is pretty well good for Star Wars. But yeah, he has hit on everything. I just, like you said, I don't know if he wants it because Dave is more of a creative person. You could maybe throw Jon Favreau of being the business side, but I don't think he even wants to do it because he's more of a creative person.
I'm going to pose the question of again, who? So, in terms of legacy, who is the heir? Who is the next George Lucas? Who will head up Lucasfilm?
I think one thing you have to do if you're Disney is you have to throw. If I'm not going to tell. How would I phrase this? If I were Disney, here's what I would do.
Okay.
If I was Disney, I would sit down with find whatever, and I would ask Dave Filoni to interview the people that are applying for whatever job,
Mm-hmm.
and I get them comfortable with each other. But what my directive as being overall Disney is allowing Dave to do pretty much whatever he wants to greenlight, and then basically I would run it as two separate entities, I guess. It's like you have Dave Filoni being the creative and the business guy being the business guy, Dave does the creative stuff. Dave and John really, but Dave and John doing the creative stuff and greenlighting pretty much whatever they want to do, right? Because I believe most of what they do is a hit. Then you have the business guy, and this is my directive if I was Disney to the business guys, let Dave Filoni do whatever he wants to do creative wise. You run the business as you're doing the promotion, the necessary paperwork to get other shows running. But basically, you're just there as the front man for Dave Filoni. That way, you can take the criticism, you can do everything else, but basically greenlighting Dave Filoni's stuff and kind of getting out of the way of the creatives and basically being like, just to name the few shows that are coming up, like we said, Bad Batch, Ahsoka, and Mando season 3. Basically, you just do the marketing and the press or whatever you need to do for those shows and make it as hype and I don't know how you'd say it. Basically, make it the most likable that people want to watch the product and get out of the way of Dave Filoni. Basically, Dave Filoni does the creative stuff, and you run the business however Dave Filoni wants the creative stuff to go. That's kind of how I look at it.
I agree with that model, and it makes me think of, oh goodness, it's James Gunn and some other guy. I can't think of his name running DC now, but it's like I don't know exactly how DC is going to be structured with Warner Bros. Brothers being kind of the big Disney entity in this case. But it makes me think of that. It's like Dave Filoni, he's the creative guy, right? Like make those creative decisions. Give me a good story, Dave. Give me a good story.
Mm-hmm.
And then it almost seems as if you need another guy or woman in there, not just a guy, someone in that position at the same level as a partner to help Dave with the connections. Because my perception of Dave Filoni, I don't know him personally, obviously. I don't know a lot about him. But my perception of him from what I've heard is he's probably not a guy with a lot of relationships. He's probably good in a room when he has the people in the room that he needs there to be. It's the big wigs, big dogs in the room. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure he can hold the conversation. but he doesn't have those relationships. And he needs someone like, I would say, Jan Favreau, who, in my opinion, don't know him personally, don't know much about him, but my perception of him is he's a guy with a lot of relationships. He worked on Zathura. He did Elf, for crying out loud. Everybody loves Elf.
I mean, he did. I mean, for goodness sakes, he was the one who did Iron Man 1, and he acted and directed that, I think.
Sure. He built technology. He was behind the idea for The Mandalorian. He was the creator of The Mandalorian. We love The Mandalorian. The technology, the volume that they used to film The Mandalorian. Dave Filoni and Jan Favreau are the perfect duo, because a lot of what George Lucas did when he wasn't storytelling was push the technology, like Jan Favreau was doing. But then you have Dave Filoni, who shares and was literally the apprentice to George Lucas, who shares George's ideals. You put them together.
And vision for Star Wars.
Yes, vision for Star Wars. You put them together and you have George Lucas. No one will ever be George Lucas. But I think you can get there between, two or more people. In this case, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. I think that right there brings us full circle back to the point, or the question of this podcast, which is this a turning point? Is Bob Iger that source of hope that we've been looking for? Is there going to be change at Lucasfilm as a result of the change at Disney in the CEO position? Is he that source of hope? I don't know. But I think that's a great place to leave off of this episode. It's been I think we've covered a lot in this episode, and I think that this is a good launching pad for content in the future for us. And so I really hope that everybody listening will definitely subscribe to us on YouTube, us here on Spotify. Do a like on YouTube.
If you have any questions about our thoughts on Star Wars, please leave them down in the comments on YouTube and on Spotify. If there's comments on Spotify, I don't know. But please do that. We would really appreciate it. I hope you guys were entertained by our topic today.
Well, I don't know if we're entertaining people. I suppose that will probably come with more practice. But, yes, I hope that you all were at least intrigued, perhaps, maybe by our conversation here. And yeah, like Dee said, leave some comments in YouTube. Maybe we could actually have a little segment at the end, once we start actually getting some viewers, where we could answer a few questions perhaps from the comment section. A little bit of a Q&A. So, but yeah, I'm really glad we got this started.
Me too.
Yeah, and I think that this is a good, like I said, launching pad for future discussion about Lucasfilm, Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel, for that matter. So I think that's a good place to leave it off. All right. Well, to everyone listening out there, we really appreciate it, and we will see you soon.